Any UCLA fans in the house today? OH, IO. I should have worn my Buckeyes jersey today, right? I wore that last time. All right. So Doc just wrapped up a series that we had. He was talking about these terms that we as Christians use, and we use them in a weird way. So he was trying to kind of correct our definitions. And I'm going to kind of do the same thing, but I'm going to do it a little differently because I'm always concerned with the way that words get used. And Doc talked about how we as Christians use these kind of weird terms, but I'm thinking more about how we use these terms in our normal conversations, and we need to take a certain perspective on what those terms mean. And as we come to read through the Bible, we hear these words, and when we use them in our conversation with other people who are not believers, we often wonder, are we even working with the same dictionary here? Because their definitions of certain words are way different than our definitions of certain words. And also, as 21st century English speakers, we oftentimes bring other definitions, what we think words mean, into the text when we read it. But as Christians, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're using God's definition of the term and the definition that the original authors meant when they used these words. So today I'm going to make the case that there's a word that we use in the culture at large that is not the way that Christianity defines it. And also, the way that the authors use this word in the text should draw us closer to God. It should strengthen us, and then it should also motivate us to do more change in the world around us, and that word is faith. So, and this word faith is really important to us because we talk about what we believe. We call that our faith. This is my faith, which is a summary of these things that I believe. And when someone becomes a new believer, we say they've made a profession of faith. And as Protestants, we use this word. One of the distinctives that makes Protestants different than Roman Catholics or Greek Orthodox or whatever is this thing called sola fide, which is faith alone. So this is something that makes us distinct from other denominations, so to speak. This word faith appears a lot in the New Testament. Paul uses it over 60 times in Romans and Galatians. The author of Hebrews uses it about 30 times. Overall, this word faith appears 296 times in the New Testament alone. So it would seem that this word is really, really important to us. So, and some of the most famous verses with this word are Ephesians 2:8, where it says, "By grace you have been saved through faith." And then the righteous shall live by faith. That's Habakkuk 2:4. But there's also 2 Corinthians 2:5-7, which says, "For we live by faith, not by sight." And then James 1:6 says, "But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind." And 1 Peter 1:8 says, "Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory." So when we use this word faith today in our conversations, there's usually another word that's kind of implied before that, and that's blind. When we use this word faith in normal conversations, what people probably think of is like, you don't have any good reasons, you just believe. They think that you're like walking around blindly with your eyes closed, and then you just had faith and you went that way, even though you didn't have any good reasons to. And part of this is because secular institutions have kind of promoted it that way. If we watch movies and TV shows and the news, typically the Christian that shows up on the news or the Christian that's in the movie, what happens is someone is having a crisis. And they go to this Christian hoping that they're going to give them an answer to what's going on. And the Christian rarely has a good reason, and they just usually say, you just got to have faith. That's usually the answer that we get. And also with the increase of science and technology, we have this thing in our mindset that we have to verify everything before we believe it or before we trust it. And since we can't do a scientific experiment to make God show up all of a sudden, and we can't recreate the resurrection in a laboratory experiment, we shouldn't trust these things. We shouldn't think that they're true. Atheist and evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins has this to say in his book, The God Delusion. This is how he defines faith. He says, faith is persistent false belief held in the face of strong contradictory evidence. So to Dawkins and many others, faith is the opposite of reason. But do we really live our lives this way? Do we really live our lives in such a way that requires verification in order to take action? And I would say absolutely not. Like, can you imagine? Who in here verified that the chair that they sat in today was going to hold them before they sat in it? Good. Get your hand out back there. No, nobody did. Nobody inspected the jointery. Nobody looked at and did put a pressure gauge on the seat to verify that this thing was going to work before you sat in it. No. You looked at the chair, you trusted the chair, and you sat in the chair. You didn't need to have all your I's dotted and pass a bunch of tests. That didn't happen. So what we need to do then is look at what the Bible says about faith. We need to look at that biblical faith. What does the Bible say? And so if we want to know how Christians are supposed to define this term, we need to look at the Bible. So did the Bible authors have Dawkins' definition? Do they have this definition, the same one as him, that it's belief in spite of the evidence? Do they ask us to just believe without asking questions? Now, the best way to figure out what a word means is to look at that word in context of the rest of the passage, right? So who remembers how many verses I said had the word faith in it? 296. So here we go. You ready? I'm kidding. Tough crowd. All right. No, seriously, I'm going to go through several passages, but we're mainly going to read 3 different passages today, so it's okay. All right. So if any of you took my class on the Logos Bible software, you know what I'm talking about when I say I did a word study on this word, because you know what that looks like. The Greek word, because all the manuscripts were originally written in Greek. And the Greek word that gets translated as faith is the word pistis. And that's the word that appears almost 296 times. And in Greek, pistis doesn't belief without reason, or just closing your eyes and believing blindly. Pistis means truth. It means trust and faithfulness. And when the New Testament was the next thing that happened with the New Testament is it got translated in the next major translation was into Latin. And the Latin word that gets used is fides, like I said earlier, about sola fides, which the Latin word means trust. And another word that gets frequently tied in with faith is belief. Belief is the word pistevo. And you notice how they sound very similar. Pistis and pistevo, they have the same root. Does anybody else geek out on this stuff, or is it just me? Like about how? Thank you, Richie. I appreciate you, buddy. All right. So all of these definitions, though, they imply some sort of relationship to the person that you have faith in or that you believe in. So you trust them in that way. In other words, you have reasons to trust this person that you have faith in. You didn't decide to have faith in someone blindly just because. You didn't close your eyes and just start following that person or believing what they had to say. This concept of belief is based on reason is played out all through the text. There are a lot of examples, and we're going to look at 3 of them today. So, first place is Genesis 22. If you guys want to turn to that. We're going to start in verse 1 and go through the first 12 verses. And if you don't have your Bibles with you, it'll be here on the screen. So what we're going to do is look at a passage that a lot of people would use as evidence that we're supposed to just blindly follow God. And I used to think that, like even as a Christian, when I first read this passage is about Abraham having to sacrifice his son Isaac. And when I first read this passage, actually not first, I just thought this for a long time. I thought the purpose of this passage was you just got to blindly follow God and do what he says. But as we're going to see, that's not the interpretation that we should get. So if you guys are ready, I don't know, a lot of you are probably using the NIV because that's what Doc uses. I use the ESV, which stands for the extra spiritual version. All right, here we go. So, verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on your boy, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So did you catch it? Did you catch the contextual clue in the passage that showed that God trusted, or that Abraham trusted God the whole time? Okay, go to verse 5. What does it say in verse 5? It says that he tells the men, I and the boy will return. Abraham knew the whole time. He knew the whole time they were both coming back down that mountain alive. He didn't doubt God. He didn't have any of that kind of stuff going on. I also want to address another word that gets used there, and that's the word fear. And in our 21st century vocabulary, we think of that as like running and hiding because we're scared of something. But the Jewish sense of this word is not fear. They're not like that. The Jewish sense is awe and respect, which again is another term that shows relationship and trust. I respect this person, so I fear him and I do what he says. That's the sense of that word. So why did Abraham trust God? Well, because in chapter 18, God promised Abraham that he was going to have a son, and this son was going to be the start of many nations. So Abraham figured it out. He said, God made me this, and he kept it, right? Like he promised to his wife Sarah, who was well beyond the age to be able to bear children, and he gave him a son. That was a miracle. It shouldn't have happened. But he made this promise, and he made that promise come true. So he showed him that he would keep his promises. So here's Abraham going up this mountain going, he said he was going to do, make a nation out of us. My son has to be alive to make that happen. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen when I get up there, but I know we're both coming back, right? It wasn't blind. And the best commentary for the Old Testament is the New Testament. And in the New Testament, Paul tells us in Romans that it wasn't what Abraham did that made him righteous. It wasn't this act of sacrificing his son. It was that he trusted God. In Romans 4, starting in verse 1, it says, What then shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, that's pistevo. Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. So it was this belief, this trust in God is what counted him as righteous. Now, another great example is Moses and the burning bush. And we don't have time to go through that passage as well, but just remember, Moses is at the burning bush, and God says, go to those people and tell them this is the plan. And Moses says, they ain't going to listen to me. And God says, all right. And what does God do? Does God say, look, you go over there and you tell those fools to get in line and just do what I say? No, he doesn't do that. He says, go over there and perform these miracles. Do these things as evidence that I am who I say I am and that they should trust me. That's how that passage plays out. Now, when we turn to the New Testament, and this honestly, this is one of the things that made me start following Jesus when I did. Jesus was an evidentialist. What I mean by that is he gave reasons for why we should trust that he is who he said he is. So, like, for example, throughout his ministry in the Gospels, Jesus routinely did miracles, right? He healed the blind. He provided food for over 5,000 people. He did all these wonderful things. And oftentimes, sermons will focus on a specific miracle, and the sermon is about look at what he did for this person. He can feed your soul. He can all these kind of things. And that's fine. But the main purpose of those miracles is not that. The main purpose of the miracles in the New Testament is for the people who were there for Jesus, that was evidence that he was who he said he was. It was evidence. He didn't just walk around and show up on the scene and say, hey guys, I'm God, and you got to trust me. Just believe me, okay? That's not what he did. He gave reasons that people should believe who he was. And the biggest piece of evidence of all was that he came back to life. That's the big one. He predicted that he was going to get arrested. He predicted that he was going to be crucified, not crucified, but he predicted that he was going to be tortured and killed, and he predicted he was going to come back. I'm going to do all these things. Trust me. And when you see it happen, you're going to trust me, right? That's the big one. Now, one of my favorite examples of Jesus giving reasons for why we should trust him comes in Luke, and it's an encounter with John the Baptist. So again, if you would turn to Luke 7, starting in verse 18. We're going to have a look at that passage now. So while you're getting there, let me set the context. So here's John. And John the Baptist is Jesus' cousin. He's been with Jesus almost actually he's older than Jesus. He's a few months older than Jesus was. He's been with him his whole life. John is the one who baptized Jesus in the River Jordan. John heard and saw the glorification come down on Jesus. He heard God say, "This is my son whom I am well pleased." He's heard and seen all this stuff. He's been witness to a lot. He's been heard a lot about Jesus' miracles. And here's John in prison. And John starts to have doubts. Now remember, even at this phase in his life, when John is having doubts, Jesus still called him the most holy man alive. Okay, so remember that. All right, so let's read the passage. So starting in verse 18. So what happens is John sets out and he sends some messengers. He's doubting in prison, so he wants to send some messengers to Jesus to see if he really was who he said he was. The disciples of John reported all these things to him. Oh, right before this, what happens is Jesus had done some more miracles. He had healed some people. He had brought someone back from the dead, and this stuff got reported back to John. So the disciples of John reported all these things to him. And John, calling two of his disciples to him, sent them to the Lord, saying, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?" And when the men had come to him, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to you, saying, 'Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?'" In that hour, he healed many people of diseases and plagues and evil spirits, and on many who were blind, he bestowed sight. And he answered them, Go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, the poor have good news preached to them, and blessed is the one who will not be offended by me. So, here's John sitting in Herod's dungeon, and he sends out his followers. And put yourself in John's sandals for a minute. Nobody? Really? Okay, never mind. Tough crowd. Jesus, the Jews have been taught that what the Messiah is going to look like is the Messiah is going to come and reconcile Israel, because they've been oppressed, they've been occupied, they've been dispersed. The Messiah is supposed to come and you reunite all that stuff back together. But here's John sitting in prison, and he's like, what the heck, right? Like, what is going on here? So John's disciples come, and now I got to admit, if this were me, I would look at these guys and say, look, I've already done a lot. I've already done this miracle and done this thing and that thing. You go tell John to chill out and just wait. He should know better. That's kind of how I would take it. But thankfully, Jesus doesn't do that, right? What does he do? He gives more evidence. He heals people in front of these guys. He says, look, healed, saved, dispersing demons. He does all of these things as evidence that he was who he said he was. And he said, now you go back and report that, what you've witnessed, report that back to John. So, we aren't as fortunate as those guys were, right? Like I said, those miracles were used in front of people to give evidence that Jesus was who he said he was. But we're 2,000 years removed from that, so we don't have that kind of stuff. What do we do? What reasons do we get? And you know what? Some people do experience modern day miracles. Some people have had miraculous healings. There could be people in this room that have had miraculous healings. I don't doubt that those things still happen. But when I put my trust in Jesus, it wasn't because I had witnessed some kind of miracle. And it wasn't because I had some kind of warm and tingly sensation all of a sudden. And it wasn't because I didn't have this, I didn't hear this voice in my head. That wasn't what happened to me. I had to have reasons. And that's why I said I love Jesus, because he was an evidentialist. And I had to have reasons. I need to have things clarified to me. Often to my wife's dismay, I ask a lot of questions. I need to know why we're doing this thing. And let me tell you, God provided. He provided the reasons after I put the work in. And it's because I understand these reasons that my faith stands strong in adversity. When things are pummeling me and the world looks crazy, it's because I know that these reasons exist, that I understand, that I know that Christianity is true. And I think Christianity is true like gravity is true, okay? I don't think that it's just like some kind of a weird, yeah, this is what I think. No, I think it's true like gravity is true. But I know that because I have reasons. Now, I'm going to give you some of those reasons right now, and I'm not going to try to defend all of these reasons right now. I'm not going to flesh them all out as much as you possibly could, because there's a lot of time that can be spent on this, but I just want to run through them real quick. So first off, one of the reasons that we can trust that God exists is that anything exists at all. Because we all know through life experience that things don't just pop into existence on their own. They need some kind of a cause. The scientific evidence tells us that we've all heard this term, the Big Bang, right? Well, the Big Bang needed a Big Banger, okay? The universe didn't bang itself into existence. There was nothing, and then there was stuff, and then it exploded. That's what nothing means. Nothing means no thing. It's what rocks dream about. Nothing. So the fact that anything exists means that something had to create it. Something outside of the thing that created it. Second, believe it or not, the more that science digs into the universe and digs into life, the more evidence we find that we are living in a designed system. We call this the fine-tuning argument. What that means is, if you look at how precise things have to be in order for life to even exist, Like, there are certain constants in the universe, like the gravitational constant. And if you think of these constants as numbers on a dial, a lot of these constants, if you turn the dial just a tick to the left or the right, then the whole thing falls apart. Like if with the gravitational constant, if you tick it one way, then either the whole universe explodes and life doesn't exist, or it collapses in on itself and nothing exists. That's just one. There are hundreds of these constants that had to be just perfect for everything to come together and for life to exist. Like if I pull out my phone here and I see this phone, if I've never seen one of these before, I know that somebody made this. I know it didn't grow on a tree, and I know it didn't just automatically appear. I know what design looks like. So when we look at the stuff in the world and we see how complicated and how complex all of this stuff had to be just so for everything to exist, that should tell us somebody designed this, right? So that's called the fine-tuning argument. All right, somewhat related to this idea of the fine-tuning argument is what theologians call general revelation. And what that means is we can look around at the universe, and like when we stare up into the sky and we see the stars, and we can think, man, this place it's so huge. Or, wow, look at how beautiful the stars are. Those things, that is God revealing himself to us in a way that we don't get the Christian God necessarily. We don't get Jesus. We don't get salvation through this kind of thing. But it should make us go, man, something big is going on here, and I'm part of that. That's what we call general revelation. So the third reason that we would have is, believe it or not, is pain and suffering. And oftentimes people will say that because pain and suffering exists, God can exist. But this is actually evidence that God does exist. Because we all feel and know, and it doesn't matter when you lived, it doesn't matter what you believed, everyone knows that the world is messed up. Even atheists who don't believe that anything outside of the world exists, they know the world is messed up and it ought to be better. Well, the only way that you get an ought to be better is if something outside of humanity exists to make it better, to define what that better is. If you're on a line, if you're looking at a line, the only way that you know that you have a curvy line is if you know what a straight line looks like. That's C.S. Lewis, if anybody's ever heard that part before. If evolution and humanity are up to figuring out what's right and wrong, then it's all just opinion. It's all just your preference. That's all it is. It's all right and wrong is. There has to be a transcendent lawgiver that lives above us to define what is right and wrong. Otherwise, it's just opinion. It's just, if something is wrong to you, it's just something that you don't like. So that's the third one. Fourth, we have great reasons to trust this book right here. Great reasons. And I gave a lot of them in a 6 weeks class that I taught a couple months ago. If you missed it, I have the links to everything. I can send them to you. I'm happy to share that with you. But there's a lot of reasons that we should trust this book and be able to get the information that we use. And then finally, there are a lot of reasons to trust that Jesus was who he said he was. That this man, Jesus of Nazareth, came to earth as a man in order to reconcile a bunch of dirty, rotten sinners like us back to their Creator. That was his mission, and there's evidence to show, a lot of good reasons to believe that he actually pulled that off. The society, a lot of people will go as far as thinking, I like Jesus. He was a really good dude. He said some great stuff. But we have reasons to believe that it was much more than that. Much more than that. And I'm actually going to be teaching a class on that in a couple weeks, so keep an eye out for that. All right, so what? So now that we have a better understanding of what this word faith means and how it works, what do we do with that? I didn't teach you what this word means, so you can go, own your atheist friends and say, that's not what it means. That wasn't when you get this kind of information, it should transform you, and then you should then go out and do something with it. So what do we do with that? The first lesson here is that all of the reasons that I gave, and there's a lot more than just those 5, all of those reasons should form the foundation that our faith is built on. Giving reasons for why Christianity is true is called apologetics. Doc used to introduce me as, this is Dave, he's our apologist, because that is what I'm very passionate about that topic. I love this kind of stuff. He used to introduce me that way to new people in the church. And the number one thing, without a doubt, without a doubt, that apologetics has done for me is strengthen my faith. I haven't used it very much to change people's minds. I mean, maybe I have. I don't get to know that all the time. But this, first and foremost, these reasons strengthen my faith. I like to think of faith like a Jenga tower. And when you first get saved and you're on fire for the Lord, it's like the tower is perfect, man. It's like straight and all the blocks are together. There's no gaps. Strong. You're standing on top of that thing, and man, you're good. But then, after some time, things start to happen, and life still happens, right? You bump into some Christians that don't seem like they've read the Bible before, and then a block gets pushed out here and there. You look around at the world and you think, man, this place is crazy, and God is supposed to exist to make this place better? Huh? Another block gets pushed out. Tragic. You may have this idea that when you become a Christian, you're set. Your life is supposed to be sunshine and roses now, but tragedy still strikes. You still got bills to pay. It is tough. More blocks fall out, and more, until finally this tower of your faith collapses. Well, apologetics is like taking that tower and slathering it in super glue, so that whenever your tower gets pressed on and gets punched or knocked around, your faith stays strong and it holds you together. That's what it's done for me, for sure. Because I know no matter how badly Christians act, myself included, like there's times where I'm going, what have I just done? Do I really think this is true? And it causes me to question a lot of things. But I know the reasons that God exists. And I know the reasons that Jesus was who he said he was. And I know the reasons to trust the Bible. So that is a foundation that I can always stand on and trust whenever I need to. Now, another takeaway that we should have is that part of trusting someone is that you don't always get all of your questions answered. You don't always get your I's dotted and your T's crossed, okay? And God bless my wife, I've had to learn that because she'll say, can you go put this over there? And why? Why should I put it? What, can we, no, just do it, please, right? You don't always get to have your questions answered. And you don't always get to have your questions answered by God, that's for sure. You don't get to have that all dotted and your T's crossed, your I's dotted and your T's crossed. But you know enough about the person who's asking you to trust them because you have other reasons that you've had in the past that you'll trust them when they ask you to do this thing, that they're not asking you to do something that you shouldn't do. Proverbs 3:5-7 says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart and do not lend on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. Now, this might seem contrary to what I've been talking about for 20 minutes about not having to have reasons to take action. But the point is, you have those reasons because of an experience you had in the past. So you already do have those reasons. Now, based on those reasons, you should trust you should trust God to then take action in your life. Also, trust isn't following God when everything is going great. Trust is following God when it is rough. That's trust. That's when the trust shows up. Part of trusting God is obedience. It is. God, I do not understand this. I don't. But I trust you, so I'm going to do what you asked me to do, right? God, people keep saying that if I pray more, and if I give more, and if I read my Bible more, that my life is going to be great. My life is rough. I have patches where it just seems rough on my knees. But you've asked me to do these things. You've asked me to pray. You've asked me to give my offering. You've asked me to read my Bible. So I'll continue to do it. I trust you. Now, be careful not to overstep what you trust God will do. Right? We have to be careful. I'm not suggesting that we should trust that God will do all of these things for us. Like, I trust that God will cure my mom from cancer. I trust that God will save my uncle. I trust that God will save America and turn it into a Christian nation. We have to be careful not to overstep those promises, because he didn't promise any of that stuff. None of that's promises. Those aren't things that we can trust him to do. He may grant us those things, praise God, but he doesn't say that those kind of things are going to happen. My mom was the most Christ-like person you will ever have met. She died suddenly of cancer in 4 weeks, and she was gone. They diagnosed it, and she was gone. She suffered for 4 weeks, this woman who lived like Christ her whole life. Now, it was a great experience, let me tell you. It was a great moment. It was beautiful, the whole thing. Believe it or not, I found beauty in this moment with my mother. Also, the last time I checked, America isn't mentioned in the pages of the Bible. There's no guarantee that this country will ever be a Christian nation, ever again, even if it wasn't to begin with. Now, so we could argue that America is a post-Christian nation, and that we may say, it's over. Like, that ship has sailed. That may be the stance that we take. But I'm going to argue that that doesn't mean that we give up, because the mission is still the mission. We have a job to do. Sharing the gospel and showing people what Christ looks like is still the mission, even if we don't see the immediate returns. That's one of these things. If you remember, one of the last messages I gave was about gardening, right? Like, you don't always get to see the fruits of your labor, but you still do the gardening to tend that garden. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've said this: God, no one is listening. No, they make fun of me. My relationships are strained because of the things that I say. But I've lost family members because of the things that I say. This doesn't seem to be working, but I trust you. And God has profited that, let me tell you. Finally, we demonstrate our trust in God by being obedient and by the works that we do. Now, it's not, again, think about the passage in Romans. It wasn't the works that justified Abraham. These were an outcropping of his trust in God. And these are a result of the love that we have. Our works at times are the result of love that we have for this person that we're trusting. Like, if you're in a marriage, like, I do things for my wife. I do things for my kids. Like, I get up early in the morning. So it just makes sense that I'm the one that makes the lunches. So I do. And I make lunches not because I feel like I need to prove to my wife that I love her, or that I need to prove to my kids that I love them. I do it because I love them. Does the difference make sense? Right? I do it because I love her and I want her to have something to eat. I don't, when she comes home from the grocery store, I don't go out there to get the groceries to prove that I love her. She already knows I love her. I do it because I love her. I do it because I don't want her to suffer from a Costco trip. Right, you guys know what that's about. So, and this is what our trust in God looks like. We shouldn't be living our lives in a way, we should be living our lives in a way that demonstrates how much trust that we have in the one who saved us. And we should trust these things that he's told us, these promises that he's made, that we're going to spend eternity with him, and we should live like it. That's how we should be living our lives. Now, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of Christians who have this blind faith that I talked about in the beginning. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard a celebrity of some kind, whether it's an actor or a musician or whatever, say, yeah, I grew up in the church, but they told me I couldn't really ask questions, and I just got to believe. And I couldn't get with that. I get it. Like I wouldn't be able to handle that either, personally. So these blind faith people do exist. And I gave a few passages in the beginning about having faith in things that are unseen. But there's another one that often gets used, which people will say encourages us to have a blind faith, and that comes in John. So go ahead and turn to John. What was the chapter I gave you? Yeah, thank you. John 20, verse 24. This is doubting Thomas. I'm sure most of us know this passage, right? So we're going to read that one real quick. Doubting Thomas. All right, so now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, unless I see his hands and the mark on the mark of his nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I'll never believe. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." So people often look at that last verse and they think that that means that we should just believe without having to see it, without the evidence. And it may look like he's scolding him, but it wasn't Jesus that Thomas was doubting. Who was Thomas doubting? The eyewitnesses. He was doubting the apostles, because they're the one that gave him the eyewitness testimony that they had seen the empty tomb and that they had seen the risen Jesus. So, and honestly, like we put one of the great things I love about the Bible is it puts everything out there, warts and all, right? Even the apostles in the beginning didn't believe that Jesus had risen from the dead. And these are guys that we call saints now in some denominations. Like, they didn't believe it either, because the first people to see that the tomb was empty were the women. And back then, in first century Judaism, you didn't trust women's testimony. You just didn't. So they didn't trust it, and they had to go check it out for themselves too. They had to go to the tomb and see that it was empty, and then they had to see Jesus. So these guys also had to have their doubts assuaged, so to speak. And Jesus' point becomes clearer as we read the last verses of John's Gospel, where he says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe," that's pistevo again, "that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." So John spells out the purpose of his gospel. He gives you right there. He says, "I wrote these things down so that you, who didn't get to witness them like we did, you can also believe and trust." That's the purpose of John's gospel. And he's signaling to us that God's revelation is complete in the person of Jesus Christ. We have all the evidence that we need in order to trust God and to believe that Jesus was who he said he was. We don't need to see miracles like the other people did. We have the evidence right here. We have it in other documents. We have it in science. We have it in philosophy. We have enough evidence. You don't have to withhold your belief anymore. Now, I don't want to deny that miracles still happen. And the ironic thing is that a lot of miracles probably don't happen as regularly or aren't as reported as regularly here in the United States, but that's because we have the Bible, I would say. God has revealed himself to us in this way. But in places like over in the Middle East, where the Bible isn't allowed, you hear all kinds of Muslims report having visions of Jesus. And they talk about experiencing miracles and all those kind of things because they don't have this testimony, but we do. So we have the reasons that we need. Now, so let's wrap this up here. Talking with some of our friends about belief, they often use this term, or about faith, they often use this term too. And when they use it, they say, "Yeah, I just had faith." Right? Like even people that don't believe what we believe, they use that term. And what they mean is, I don't know, I don't know, I just did it. That's kind of what they mean. It's become one of those terms for them. So now what I would say is rather than try to convince them that they got the definition wrong, what I would do is, and I would even encourage you, honestly, not to use the word faith in your conversations with them. That may sound weird, but I know we use it 296 times it's here, but I would encourage you to try not to use that word, or to maybe fix it in, slip it in less likely. But use words like trust and conviction, because those words they know. Those words they understand, right? Like, I put my trust in Jesus because I've read what he said, and I think he got it right. Or I have convictions about this specific issue because I understand a lot of these things that are going on through what God has said. Now, I could have used faith in either one of those examples, but I didn't. I used other words that the culture is more familiar with, right? Trust and conviction. Now, in the end, though, we shouldn't be the kind of Christians who believe simply because they want to or need to. The people who do have blind faith, and that's dangerous. Blind faith is dangerous because you can get led off of a cliff, no doubt. And it isn't taught in the Bible. Blind faith is not taught in the Bible. Asking questions is a way to come to know someone. That's how I come to know people. That's how I came to know my wife. I asked questions to get to know her, and God, that was a form of worship to God. God wants us to ask questions to get to know him. No, the Bible doesn't encourage us to believe just because. It encourages us to trust based on reason and evidence. And based on that reason and evidence, we should come to the rational conclusion that Christianity is true. And when God seems absent, when you look around, does anybody else feel like they're an alien living on a foreign planet sometimes? Like, as I sure do, right? When you have that feeling, when you're suffering loss, when you have those kind of problems, and when you go through trials, we don't have faith just because. We trust in God because he's given us reasons to. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this lesson today. Thank you for the words that you've given us. Oftentimes it's hard because we feel like you're hidden from us because you're not physically present. But we know that you've given us reasons. We know that you've given us reasons to trust you and believe you and follow you and do what you ask of us, Lord. And we thank you for that because you're not hidden from us. And I pray that we just take this lesson, this trust, and go out this week and show people how much we trust you and live a life that attracts them towards you, God, and they can get to know you and be transformed like we are.